Hello and welcome to Good Game, the show for gamers by gamers. I'm Badgeman.
And I am Storm, one of the Hexmen. And no, you don't need to adjust your transmission because we are broadcasting live from our secret
superhero badge cave.
It's headquarters.
The badge cave.
Headquarters.
Badge cave.
To celebrate the steely resolve and awesome power of our favourite video game superheroes.
Yeah, so when it comes to video game superheroes, the definition of what one actually is can be a bit tricky.
Yeah, I mean, if you put aside obvious superheroes that have had their own games, like Hulk or Superman, video games are still abundant with characters that you could call superheroes. Characters like Alex Mercer and Prototype, Capcom's Beautiful Joe. In fact, even Master Chief from the Halo series could be classified as a superhero.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that any character with some sort of immense power that wields that power for good can be classed as a superhero. Having said that, though, my favourite superhero doesn't have any powers, just a kick-ass cape. Coming up on the show, we're going to look at some of our favourite superhero games as well as DC Universe Online.
Plus, we'll delve into the history of heroes in games and revisit one of the worst ever made.
And we'll look at the pitfalls of putting players in control of their favourite heroes. It doesn't always work out, does it?
But first up, can you guess the game for this week?
Cool! Too easy.
Badge, what's this big red phone for?
Well, that's the badge phone hex. That's here in case we get the call.
What's the call?
Well, that's when we have to snap into action and go save the universe or answer the door if the pizza guy's here or something.
Badge, it's not even plugged in.
It'll ring. Trust me.
Good game.
Hex, a Good Game special wouldn't be a Good Game special if it didn't have that special something that makes a Good Game special so special.
Oh, that's right. It's time to backwards compatibilize the entire genre of superpowered superhero video games. But first, a disclaimer.
That's right, Good Gamers. We know you like to try and spot the games we leave out whenever we do a backwards compatible segment, but we can tell you this right now, there have been so many superheroic games over the years that we're not even going to try and mention every single one of them. That would be very silly.
But even this entirely abridged version of super video game history has to start at the very beginning. The first superhero to gain the power of interactivity was none other than the Man of Steel himself, Superman. It came out for the Atari 2600 way back in 1978 and required Supes to stop an evil plan by Lex Luthor before returning to his day job at the Daily Planet as Clark Kent, presumably to write up a report on the whole incident for the late edition. Although it was good that we finally had a game that simulated what it was like to wear your underpants on the outside, the primitive technology meant that this game was mostly just pants.
DC Comics may have had their red and blue superhero immortalised in video game history first, but their eternal rival Marvel Comics weren't far behind with this. Your friendly neighbourhood Spiderman made his digital debut 4 years later in 1982, also on the Atari 2600. And this time the gameplay was only slightly more befitting of a superhero, with Peter Parker's alter ego having to web sling his way up a skyscraper while the Green Goblin tries to knock him down to the street below.
Look, someone has to say it, but practically none of the earliest superhero games had anything going from them apart from the name on the front of the box.
Games like the Silver Surfer on the Nintendo Entertainment System or the Flash on the Sega Master System were computerized crimes that were way up there with the evil deeds of any supervillain. And it would take until the 1990s for superhero games to really start flexing their spandex-clad muscles. This game right here, Captain America and the Avengers, hit the arcades in 1991. And for my money, which was about 40 cents a pop at the time, this was one of the first games to do superheroes justice.
You cannot beat me.
The Star-Spangled Sentinel of Liberty and 3 of his super friends, including Iron Man, took to the streets for the first of many side-scrolling superhero beatdowns, a formula that would be repeated in many other superhero games to follow.
Given that superheroes are particularly fond of walking sideways and punching people, the scrolling beat-em-up genre served them very well. In the early 90s, heroes like the Punisher got his own vigilante video game, seeing him meet fists to the faces of wrongdoers for a few cents a play, while Spiderman recruited the likes of Namor the Submariner and the Slinky Black Cat to help him do much of the same. Even the X-Men got their own side-scrolling brawler, which was notable for being one of the few arcade games to offer up to 6 players at once. The early 90s was also when a certain Dark Knight started to get a few good games.
Ah yes, the Caped Crusader has a long and mostly favourable legacy in the pages of video game history, first appearing as a short and pudgy version of himself in this ZX Spectrum adventure in 1986. But it wasn't until the Batman revival of the early 90s that the good games really started to emerge from the shadows, like this one on the Sega Mega Drive. Based on the 1989 Tim Burton movie, the best one, this game puts Bat up against Jack Nicholson's Joker in platform jumping, batarang throwing, grapple hooking action, and at the time it was the best Batman game available. Of course, if you play it today, it's a bit rubbish. Such is the cruel passage of time. But one Batman game that's still just as fun today as it was when it was released in 1993 is this. Batman Returns on the SNES was based on the film's sequel of the same name, and it featured more of that knuckle-tastic, bad guy bashing gameplay that superheroes seem to love so much. There was actually a Sega Mega Drive version of Batman Returns as well, although it was nowhere near as good. Unfortunately, the first 2 good Batman films were followed up by some much worse ones, and all throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, Batman games were dragged down with them, culminating in some truly regrettable games like this.
Who is
Speaking of games to regret, this next game is one that many consider to be the worst game ever made, Superman 64. Playing Superman 64 is one of gaming's true WTF moments. A disgracefully rendered Superman floats through a thick pea soup fog that prevents you from seeing any of the city of Metropolis, and the gameplay consists entirely of clumsily flying your way through rings in the sky. Superman 64 is actually a physically painful experience. It's like gaming kryptonite, and there's really only one place where this game belongs: the Phantom Zone.
While we're handing out Phantom Zonings willy-nilly, there's another DC Comics video game that I think deserves to be banished for all eternity. This. Just like Superman 64, Aquaman Battle for Atlantis for the Nintendo GameCube is an absolute triumph of amazing gameplay and polished graphics. In Bizarro World... Yeah,
Nice one.
Got it. In actuality, this interactive aquatic atrocity was about as much fun as drowning, and much like the mythical undersea city, Aquaman Battle for Atlantis is best when sunken to the bottom of the ocean and forgotten about.
But as low as superheroes have sunk in the past, there have been many classics.
I have some fond memories of playing Sega's Comic Zone on the Mega Drive, where you played a comic book artist who gets sucked into his own creation and becomes his own comic superhero. And the Justice League game on the Super Nintendo from 1995, that was pretty good as well. And it was developed by a little developer known as Blizzard, long before they made it big with a little game called Warcraft.
In the early 2000s, the Aussie contingent of Irrational Games helped bring the Freedom Force games to life, recreating the golden age of comic book art to a strategy action game with all original superheroes like Man-Bot and the Minuteman.
No more! I'll squeal!
And Spiderman 2, the movie, the game, that was like Grand Theft Auto except with spider webs. It was great.
Crazy.
Not the other movie games though, they were super fail.
A massive shout out has to go to Capcom's Versus series of fighting games. If there's any series of games to get all the superheroes exactly right, it was these games. It started with X-Men Children of the Atom in 1994, and over the years the series has evolved into an all-in brawl between the Marvel Comics superheroes and Capcom's own video game celebrities, with the likes of Wolverine and the Hulk trading blows with Ryu and Captain Commando in a super stoush that is probably the best that superhero combat has ever been, I think.
If we're talking crossover games, Hex, you know I won't let you forget about Mortal Kombat vs DC Universe. This game is one of my all-time favourite things. Not just because it has Batman, but also because I'm a big Mortal Kombat fanboy, so the combination of all of the great stars of DC Universe like Wonder Woman, The Flash, and Captain Marvel, not to be confused with Marvel's Captain Marvel, with the characters we all know and love from Mortal Kombat like Scorpion and Sub-Zero and Raiden, and this was just perfect, and it culminated in an atomic nergasm in my house.
And that pretty much brings us up to the present day. These days, superhero games are almost too numerous to mention. In the MMO space, there's City of Heroes games and Champions Online. On consoles, we're getting games like Infamous and Prototype, which meet all the requirements of being a superhero game without having to wear garish-coloured lycra bodysuits.
With so many new superhero games on the horizon, we're probably yet to see the very best of the superhero genre.
Ooh, Wolvie.
My favorite superhero has always been The Flash. So, I mean, since I was, 10 years old or something like that, I've always liked The Flash. I don't think Superman has had a game that's done him justice. For the longest time, I think Batman was the case, but I think Arkham Asylum came out and really kind of fixed that. So, but I think a great Superman game would be awesome. If, a really great implementation of flying and, zipping around the city would be cool.
Good game.
Even before movies like Kick-Ass inspired the everyday person to slip on a pair of tights, there was a secret group of vigilantes here protecting our streets.
So we tracked down one of these real-life superheroes to find out what it's like to give up gaming time for a life of fighting crime.
Hi, I'm Captain Australia, and I'm a real-life superhero. I'm on a quest to save the world. I'm an ordinary man who believes that ordinary people can be superheroes. So I put on a costume and I go out into the city streets looking for good deeds to do, people to help, and evil to fight. I was inspired to become a real-life superhero by a sense of the growing darkness and apathy that I saw in the world around me.
Okay, smile.
Captain Australia is modelled as an homage to Captain America. I'm attracted to superheroes that are honest, honourable, and have integrity. I believe that to be a hero means to live to a higher example, to have a certain moral authority that allows you to demonstrate to other people how they should try and live their lives. One of the best moments for me was fairly recent. A young guy had his bike stolen, I was able to replace it for him and just take away what was a very bleak crime. So I don't make money as Captain Australia, I have a secret identity, and this secret identity, although he's not a billionaire philanthropist, he has a job. The ability to fight evil and fight crime is part of my mission. But in terms of what I do, how I do, and why I do it, try and make constructive change in the world is by far more rewarding. I started gaming, I think, when I would have been 14 or 15 years old, and I got a Commodore 64 and I booted up Lode Runner. Almost every day of my life I've done at least some gaming, and that's got good and bad. It's allowed me to develop myself, my problem solving. It's a great way to entertain, but if you sit still for long periods of time, you can tend to put on a little bit of weight too.
Speak of the devil, here comes the public eye now.
Superhero games are great fun. I think that for me, the ones I've enjoyed most are probably the Spiderman series of games. I've always loved Spiderman since I was a little boy. And there's just something really invigorating about zipping around a city and the mode of travel, just the swinging and the physics of it. It's great fun. I think games allow you to sharpen your moral compass. You're able to face problems, solve them. You're able to develop your mental agility. You're able to think fast, and you're faced with often difficult moral choices. So you're able to practice making moral decisions. So then when you're in the position of having to do that in the real world, you've got a sense of the kind of outcomes that you face and the kind of underlying values that drive the decision that you're about to make. I definitely hope that people will take on board that simple thing, a quest to save the world. And I think that if there's people out there who are interested in pursuing those goals, jump on board and do it. I love the idea of a team of Aussie super friends or global super friends doing our own thing to try and save the world. But you have to have a rock solid, absolute commitment.
Good game.
As long as there have been video games, there have been video games about superheroes. It seems like a natural fit. You have a medium that allows players to perform any action the developers can imagine, and a genre about larger-than-life heroes and villains with powers far beyond those of normal men and women.
So why is it that so few superhero games are any good, let alone make the player feel as though they're in any way superhuman?
A superhero is defined by their powers. Sure, there's a moral code and a detailed backstory that fleshes out any character, but more than anything else, they're probably just better known for being able to lift really heavy things. Nearly everyone in games is super heroically powerful, whether they're defined as a superhero or not, and all of them have access to game mechanics that are pretty much indistinguishable from superpowers.
Think of a character that's immune to physical damage, is a formidable hand-to-hand fighter, can fly, is powerful enough to smash rocks, can breathe fire, and can even absorb the powers of his enemies. You'd think I was talking about some superhero, but I'm not. I'm talking about everyone's favourite pink marshmallow, Kirby. How can you make a superhero feel special when a character as innocuous as Kirby has access to so many phenomenal powers?
You also have to wonder, what is the difference in a video game between shooting a heat vision ray from your eyes and firing a laser weapon? They both shoot some kind of energy attack with the pull of a trigger or the push of a button. And after firing so many guns, such superpowers no longer feel so unique.
Superheroic movement also suffers from the same kind of ubiquity. I mean, there aren't many people who wouldn't love to be able to fly, but it's really interesting to fly in a video game because, well, gameplay-wise, we've done it so many times before. There's just very little difference between flying as a superhero and piloting a plane. The most interesting movement for superheroes in games are those that aren't common in other genres.
For example, Spider-Man's web swinging is not at all common, and gathering enough speed to zoom around in New York in Spider-Man 2 remains one of the single best superhero gaming moments ever.
Likewise, leaping around and charging up the sides of buildings in Hulk Ultimate Destruction is hugely fun, not only because it's different, but also because the massively powerful and slightly unpredictable nature of the movement is just so fitting for the character.
One of the things you see all too often in superhero games is powers all being reduced to the simplest form of attack. The Fantastic Four game is a perfect example of wondrous powers being reduced to nothing but a punch.
The four members of arguably the most famous super team have a wide range of abilities, from stretching powers through to invisibility and flame power. But in the game, all of these abilities are reduced to little else than skins for the same sequence of punches for each character. Powers also create another problem for game developers. How can you make a game challenging for a player if they're meant to be playing someone so much more powerful than anyone else? One of the ways that developers deal with this problem is by scaling up either the power of the opposition or their numbers. Throwing hordes of weak enemies at a player reinforces how powerful they are. But more often, developers find cheap ways to weaken our hero, or resort to inflating the abilities of their enemies until they are your equal. And if everyone is as powerful as the superhero, well, it just makes the hero feel pretty average and not very super at all.
The result of this is that it's often the less powerful heroes that are more fun to play, because our expectations of what they can achieve are simply lower.
If you look at characters like Batman, Captain America, or even Jackie Estacado from The Darkness, they're on a much more human scale. Their powers or abilities, whilst far above those of mere mortals, never have to feel godlike.
In fact, their vulnerabilities make them better video game characters. Their enemies can be on par without ever having to diminish the abilities of the heroes.
Finally, there's a hero's in-game objectives. Granted, not all superhero games are guilty of this, but how many times have you picked up a game starring your favourite hero, only to discover that most of your exploits seem to be based around breaking and collecting things? Not every mission has to be about saving the world, but really, they should be more consequential than just sending your hero on a collectathon.
So does the future hold any great promise for superheroes in games? Well, there are plenty of more big characters and big games on the way, so we can only hope that at least one of them breaks the mold and really makes players feel superhuman. Villainy!
Good game.
Spiderman. Spiderman has absolutely always been my favorite superhero. Just because there's a certain freedom that Spiderman has in the movement, just flinging around, climbing up walls, swinging and everything. It's Peter Parker. He's the normal guy that no one knows about, and he puts on the costume and he becomes this larger-than-life ego, and then he goes home and he has no money and he can't pay the bills, he can't pay the rent, his boss hates him, and he's like, well, I saved the world, everyone's alive thanks to me, and back to life sucking.
Good game.
Sony Online Entertainment have taken on the massive task of bringing the richly diverse DC comic universe to the MMO sphere. The result? DC Universe Online, and it's been out for a couple of months now. We've been playing it on PC and PS3.
If you haven't seen the intro movie yet, it's possibly my favourite cutscene of all time from any game ever.
Call him. Bring him to me.
Lex Luthor, the man you can never trust, comes back from the future to give Earth a head start in the fight against Brainiac.
Brainiac had returned.
To do this, he infects the planet with exobites, a type of nanobot that gives people on Earth insta-powers. This story idea allows you to make a character from scratch, or one inspired by a classic DC hero or villain.
What a great idea for an MMO. It's very clever, I think. Flying around Gotham, doing missions for Batman himself, making a character in his image, fighting alongside the Justice League. Oh, hex. It's a game that, for a DC fanboy like myself, I can't help but wee a little bit about. You know, all the art and the sounds and the voice acting just resonates so much for me.
Too tired to see love triumph? You should eat your flakies.
And yet, I didn't have any fun.
I know, Barjo. Let's talk about it.
Okay. Combat is a system of mouse clicks and holds, and it's all very responsive. The hits actually look like they hit, which is the first MMO I've seen do that very well. There's a lot of clicking, and it was a little bit too much for me, so I soon strapped on a gamepad, and then it was a lot better. I couldn't bind all of my gamepad buttons, though, due to bugs in the interface, so hopefully that'll get ironed out, but it definitely hampered my experience.
I liked the fighting, though. I mean, it was easy enough to pick up. Once you start getting more interesting abilities, you begin to appreciate the importance of holds and interrupts. More targeting options would have been nice, though. Quite often you target someone you don't mean to and you end up bringing them into the fight, which gets messy. We all like to play our MMOs a little bit differently, so if you can't customize things the way you want, well, some people can get a little bit cranky.
Cranky Barjo was cranky. I found the PC version really hard to get used to. There's no mouse cursor at all unless you're in the menus, so that was really strange. But then when you play on the PS3 version, you really find yourself missing the keyboard shortcuts. So it was somewhere in the middle, but it needs to be one or the other, I think. I thought the tech trees could have been a bit better. They do embrace the character that you're going for, so that's really good, but you end up putting points and abilities that you'll rarely use, if ever, simply to get to the higher end ones. You can swap abilities in and out of your loadout as you see fit, and when you reach a high enough level, you can start doing instances. And here's where it gets a little bit more confusing, because you have two roles. In my case, it was a damage and a control role, and you can swap in and out of these, but it's not really like a dual spec like other MMOs, so you'll find a lot of very confused people trying to work out exactly what sort of role they're doing in an instance, and that needed to be explained better, I think.
I found I wanted more character customization options. It's okay, but nothing compared to the brilliant customization in something like Champions Online. As you play, you'll get style loot, which enables you to make cosmetic improvements that won't change your stats.
There are two big cities that you'll be doing most of your questing in, Gotham and Metropolis. The cities themselves look quite good and they are teeming with life, but they also tend to look quite samey after a while, and the city buildings just kind of bleed into each other. It's also very hard to get a sense of this world. The map interface is pretty horrible, and I spent a lot of time just trying to work out exactly where I was and where I needed to be and which teleport to take. Even 17 hours in, I was going to the wrong police station or teleporting to the wrong location or spending ages just trying to find the teleporter to the right city from the watchtower.
Yeah, I was glad to be a flyer. Just other travel modes just aren't as efficient. I think the worst part, though, was the social aspect of the game. I mean, that really needs the most work. Simply trying to send a tell to someone is a big pain. There is a promise of a patch to overhaul the whole social interface, and it really needs it. Getting player communication right is MMO 101, and it hasn't been done here in a way that players can immediately understand, and, well, that's pretty dangerous for a new MMO.
There's no crafting or economy really to speak of, but the game is action-based, and there's always quests to go on and lots of things to punch. Many of the quests are pretty kill and collect heavy, and where another MMO might ask you to kill 5 or 8 of something, DC Online asks you to kill 15 or 25 of them, so they do get repetitive and you just push through them. We played on a PvP server, but you're not safe at any stage. There's no safe zones for questing, so you just get ganked constantly and constantly. It actually becomes a bit of a problem. There are battlegrounds, and Legends mode will let you pick an iconic character that you've unlocked to take into battle. I'm normally a huge fan of arenas and PvP hex, but for some reason here I just thought it was a bit haphazard and messy, so I didn't end up spending that much time with it.
I think the cost is a really big deal, Barjo. Australian gamers are actually paying a slightly higher subscription fee than other regions, and that just doesn't seem fair for a game that's still got so many lag and interface issues on both platforms.
And you have to ask yourself, what are you getting for that subscription fee as well? I play MMOs for the social side of things, for being able to team up with friends and go take down big bosses, for getting together a group and harassing a bunch of other players for a while, but you can't really do that here without having to use a third-party chat system.
No need to breathe deeply.
I'm such a DC fan, Hex. A whole quarter of my living room is dedicated to DC, and I wanted this to be great, but it's just not. There are too many problems here, and I don't see myself ever reaching the cap, so I'm giving it 5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
I think the best parts of the game were the cutscenes and the look of the cities. But, I think that console MMO newcomers will have a good time here and a bit of a fun bash around, so I'm going to give it 6 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Good game.
Well, that's all the time we've got for this week, Badge. Your big important red phone never rang.
It'll ring. Did you guess the game for this week? It was Boogerman, a pick-and-flick adventure from 1995. A game for the SNES and Mega Drive that followed the nose goblin flinging hero on a mission to save the world. He also farted a bit.
We'll be back to normal next week with more news and reviews, but until then, may all your games be good.
Superheroes for Hire, Badgeman speaking. How may I direct your call? We'll be right there!
Someone actually needs us? When? Where?
No, that was ABC Props. They just want all this crap back.
I call upon the power of wind and thunder!
Good job. Barjo out.
Hex out.
Where are my underpants? Screw it. Free and easy.